My name is Lynn Wild. I'm the K-State Extension Wyandotte County Master Gardener and serve as Vice President and Program Chair. Our program today is Container Gardening 2.0, presented by Kim Wetzel-Williams. So it's now my opportunity to introduce Kim Wetzel-Williams. She is the Wyandotte County Extension Master Gardener and our current secretary. Take it away, Kim.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, so what do I know about gardening in containers? First off, please note my email at the bottom of the screen. If there's something I do not cover and we don't get to your question, please feel free to email me and I will do my best to answer your questions or pass it on to the horticulture staff at our extension office in K-State. So back to what do I know about gardening in containers. I started with a house plant in 1976. It was a cutting of an angel wing from my aunt. And then I moved into the dorm in college and started rescuing dorm mates' dying houseplants. And in 1984, as an apartment dweller, I wanted my fresh vegetables. So I bought a couple of wash tubs and poked holes in the bottom and grew spinach and lettuce, and then a tomato and a cucumber. Fast forward to 1987, I got married, we bought a house, and suddenly I was excited because I had a whole backyard that I could garden in. So I did in-ground gardening for decades. I'm still in-ground gardening. But I have developed arthritis in my spine and my husband has a variety of health issues. So we've gone full circle and we are back to adding containers to make it easier for us to garden. I also used to say that the only thing I was interested in were vegetables, but I have developed a growing interest in flowers and ornamentals. So those are my credentials. So what we're going to do today is we're going to review the basics. And I ask when people registered, I ask for them to self-identify their level of expertise in containers. And about half of the 138 people who registered indicated they were beginners. So we are going to take a good look at the basics of container gardening. Then I'm going to talk about what I call containers on steroids. These are the experiments that I have been doing for the past 15 years. And finally, we will touch on container design and a few of the rules and how you can break those rules. So, why garden in containers? First off, aesthetics. You can put beautiful flowers where you might not have been able to put them in the ground. If you have plants that won't survive our Kansas winters, you can put them in a container and then bring them in the house over the winter. I recently was in Arizona and came home with 7 very large cactus, 3 of which will not survive our winters. So they will go into pots that I will bring into the basement over the winter. Gardening in containers helps you overcome some physical limitations, like I mentioned, bad back, arthritis. You don't have to bend over as far. They can overcome space limitations. Say you've got a very small yard or you're living in a rental that you cannot tear up the yard for a garden. You can grow vegetables and flowers in a container and set that container where it will get the sunlight. And again, you can overcome sunlight limitations. For example, my entire front yard is shady almost all of the time. So I have containers that I have been able to move into the few spots of sunlight I get in my front yard. Finally, you can overcome soil or ground problems. Those might be you live on an area that has been contaminated by previous owners, an ammunition plant site that somebody has attempted to recover. Or it may just be something as simple as you've got trees whose roots are growing right under the surface of the ground, and it's impossible to plant something in those roots. So you can plant in containers and set them on top of the ground. Okay, so what is a container? Well, as you can see here on the picture, there are a variety of containers. And so quite simply, Wikipedia defines a container as a small, enclosed, and usually portable object used for displaying live flowers or plants. It may take the form of a pot, box, tub, basket, tin, barrel, or hanging basket. As you can see from the pictures, Some of those go beyond what Wikipedia calls a container. We'll also show you today that there are containers that don't fit within the Wikipedia definition. Container requirements. First off, a container must have good drainage. That's the #1 rule. If your container does not have drainage, you will drown your plant. It's got to be the proper size for the plants that are going to be grown in it. You would not put a tomato in an 8-inch pot. Likewise, you would not put a delicate little African violet in a 55-gallon barrel. You want your container to be the most suitable material for your plant in your environment. You want to take into consideration the weight of the container and its scale, and we'll get into what that means in a moment. Color does play a part in the containers, but we aren't talking about whether it matches your house or the color of the flowers. We are talking in terms of heat absorption or heat reflection. Drainage. As you can see, all of these pots have some sort of drainage. Terracotta pots or ceramic pots usually come with a drain hole already created in them. Over here on the upper right, we have a hanging basket with a core filler. That's COIR. Sometimes they're coconut husks, but the water goes in and pours out rather rapidly. The center bottom picture was a beautiful pot that did not have holes in the bottom for drainage, but you can take a paddle bit or a drill bit and drill those holes rather quickly. Okay, so this is a chart that's often used. You will pick a less than or equal to 1-gallon pot for small vegetables, a 1 to 3 gallon pot for larger vegetables, or larger than 3 gallons for tomatoes and vine crops. I always wondered what that meant. What I might define as a small vegetable, somebody else might define as a large vegetable. And frankly, I have no idea how many gallons my collection of containers are. So I like this chart much better. And don't worry about copying it or trying to write down this information. I have a whole series of resources at the end that this chart came from the North Carolina State University information. But you can see they talk about the number of gallons the container has, but then they also talk over here about the depth of the container. And frequently the width of the container and the depth of the container are pretty much the same. I have a collection of 24-inch diameter pots that are also 24 inches deep. Okay. The material of your pots, they come in non-porous, semi-porous, and porous. When you're container gardening outdoors, unglazed ceramic pots should not be used for plants that you're going to leave outdoors all winter, because they will fill with water, they will freeze, and they will crack. The growing medium in a pot fluctuates in temperature quite rapidly between daylight and evening. And so using a metal pot or a dark pot is going to heat up that soil even more. Wood and plastic containers can safely remain outside all year long, but your plastic containers will fade in their color over time. Redwood and cedar are naturally naturally resistant to decay and usually can last 10 years. Heavy-duty plastic containers are the most lightweight of all. They retain moisture well and can easily be moved to a protective wall to overwinter. If you tend to overwater your plants, you would probably want to use a porous container. Conversely, if you tend to underwater your plants, use a non-porous container. And all containers should be thoroughly washed and disinfected with a non-bleach product before planting something new in them. Okay. The material composition of a container goes hand in hand with what you will be growing in it. High water consumption plants, which include almost all vegetables and many flowers, are best grown in a non-porous container. During the heat of summer, your porous containers are going to dry out much more quickly. Use those porous containers, on the other hand, for low water needing plants such as cactus, succulents, and drought tolerant plants. To determine if a plant is drought tolerant, read the label that comes with the plant, or if you've started something from seed, read the watering requirements on the seed package. Then you're going to use a semi-porous container for those plants needing water in amounts between a high use and a low use plant. So here we are at weight and scale. Weight does have to do with how much the pot weighs. Obviously, ceramic, terracotta, those are going to be heavier than a plastic container. We usually select our containers based on how pretty they are. I mean, this one here on the left is a gorgeous little container. In fact, I loved it so much. This was from a magazine, but I love this container so much that I went out and found one just like it. And it is one that I do a tabletop container planting in. You want to pick a container that is heavy enough that it's not going to fall over, get knocked over by pets or wildlife that creep into your backyard, and is not going to get blown over by our lovely Kansas winds. Obviously, you do not want it so heavy that you cannot lift it and move it around, but there are some tricks for moving a heavy container, such as using a two-wheeled hand cart or furniture dolly. Once you figure out where you are going to set your container, I would suggest that you buy a plant caddy. Now you're going to want to pick one that fits the diameter of your pot. This is one I bought for my 24-inch diameter pots because they are exactly 14 inches at the bottom. They came, as I say, straight out of the box. And if you're wondering where I got them, I do a lot of shopping on Amazon, but you can find it a variety of places. You can see them at a nursery, but they're very handy and make moving those containers around so much easier. Now there's some rule of thumbs for what you plant, and this is the scale. The plants in containers should be no more than 2 times the height of the pot and no more than 1.5 times the width in a pot. This one on the left is called Beach in a Pot, and this one on the right was Burpee's on deck corn planted in half of a 55-gallon barrel. Both of these, I think, follow that rule very nicely. The one in the middle, maybe you think it's got the right scale. I think the top is a little short for the container, but the whole thing does balance out because of the petunias that drape over the side. Now, as I said, the color of the container isn't whether it's a pretty container, but what's important is the color of the material. So we talked that metal heats up. So you would not want to set this out in full sun unless you take some kind of precautions to prevent it from overheating. Dark colored containers absorb more heat. This was actually the planting container that came from the nursery, and I do believe that before most of the summer had passed by, I managed to get that one put into a proper container. These were the plastic terracotta containers, or plastic terracotta colored containers. They get a lot of sunlight, so that's a good color if your plants are going to be in the sun. This is a darker container. It gets morning sun, but not afternoon sun, so it works just fine. Okay, we talk about potting soil, but the reality is don't ever, ever, ever use soil in your containers. True soils are field soils that often retain too much water. They have too little pore space for oxygen. They are too heavy in terms of the actual weight of the soil. And they usually contain weed seeds, insect larvae. They may contain diseases. They don't drain well, and you get poor oxygen flow. Instead, let's use what's called a soilless substrate. We usually call it potting mix, and if you're buying it by the bagful at a store, that's what you're going to look for, is potting mix. Not garden soil, not topsoil, potting mix. It's usually a mixture of perlite, some kind of wood product, sphagnum peat moss, vermiculite, sometimes sand, or a combination of these. You can make your own planting medium, and this is a simple recipe here: 2 parts sandy loam, 1 part sphagnum peat moss, and 1 part perlite. So if you were measuring by the cupful, it would be 2 cups of sandy loam, 1 cup peat moss, 1 cup perlite. The really important things are you want the larger particles to aid for drainage and aeration. The perlite is very lightweight. The whole product is going to give you some fertility. And the best thing is this is all going to be free of weeds and diseases. Okay, I think many of us grew up, if we had any exposure to houseplants, hearing grandma or aunts or moms say, now put some gravel in the bottom of your pot so the soil doesn't wash out and it helps with drainage. This is not true. And I recently read a really good article that explains why. When you have the gravel in the bottom and you put your soil, your potting mix on top, nothing is going to drain out until that soil potting mix is completely saturated. So it kind of defeats the purpose of providing good drainage if that potting mix is going to be sopping wet before anything drains out. Instead, use a coffee filter. It allows for drainage and keeps the soil, the potting mix, in the container. And as you can hear, I keep using the word soil. I mean potting mix, so don't ever think I'm telling you now to use soil. Okay, container plants need to be fed on a regular basis because you are using a potting mix that contains almost no food and nutrition for those plants. Now you can buy potting mix in the store that will say it's going to feed for 6 months or 12 months. But remember, you're running water through there and all the nutrients are washing out the bottom. So fertilizers come in a variety of compositions, and the best ones for container plants are your water soluble or your liquids, and your time release or your controlled release. If you are using water soluble or liquids, use 1/4 of the recommended rate every other watering, unless there are continuous feeding instructions available, such as for your timed release or your controlled release. Now, these are a granular product. You're going to want to work a little bit into the top of your planting mix. Don't use granular fertilizers like you would use outside in an in-ground garden because the container is too enclosed and those will tend to burn the roots of the plants. Foliar feeding, I'm not really a fan of it for any indication, but it has to be worked into the bottom of the leaves where the plant stomata are. And the solution is already very dilute so that you don't burn the foliage. So why not just go ahead and use the easiest one, the water soluble or the liquid. Okay. More plants are killed by overwatering than by underwatering. Please repeat that to yourself. And if you tend to overwater your plants, maybe you need to turn that into a little poster and put it outside by your plants so that you'll remember. I myself am guilty of overwatering my plants, and it's taken me a number of years to understand that if the top of the soil looks dry, that does not necessarily mean that the potting mix needs watered. How often you water will depend upon the type of the plant, your potting mix, the type of container, and your weather conditions, as we've already discussed. So how do you know when to water? Well, stick your finger into the top inch or so of the potting mix to feel for dryness. Then apply sufficient water until you just see a small amount come out of the bottom drain holes. One cautionary comment on containers and where you have them sitting. If you have them on a wooden deck, you should consider some way of allowing the water to drain into something so that it doesn't cause wood rot on your deck. A lot of people use a saucer, but all that does is contain the water in a saucer and defeats the purpose of drainage. I am a walking billboard for putting containers on wood decks. Do not ask me how many times we have replaced rotten boards on our deck. I'm currently working on a drainage system. I'm experimenting. I'm a great experimenter. And so if I ever find something that really works for a top deck, I'll post it on our Wyandotte County fan page on Facebook and post it to Kansas gardeners. Containers on concrete. Anything that washes out the bottom may stain your concrete patio. And that's where this caddy that I showed you before comes in very helpful, because when you go to water, you can roll the plant container on the caddy to the edge of the patio and let it drain into the lawn or planting bed that you have next to your patio. As with any plant grown anywhere, you need a logical approach to dealing with insects and diseases. So the logical approach says you do not reach for the synthetic chemicals or the organic chemicals right off the bat. You're going to want to use the least toxic approach first and use the synthetic or organic chemicals only as a last resort. Now, the Extension Service has a lot of good publications about controlling diseases, insects, and other pests. Integrated pest management is a really good one to look for. And at the end of the presentation, I have a slide, and I will provide the information on obtaining these publications. Okay, that completes the basics. Okay, do we have any questions, Lynn Wild?
Yes, we do. Let me start at the top. Hello, I was gifted a Chicago hardy fig tree, and I am trying to determine if it would be best to keep it in a container or put it in the ground.
Okay, what was it?
It was called a Chicago hardy fig tree.
Okay, I had one of those, and I had it in a container. I used a 55-gallon plastic barrel cut in half, and I had the fig for a number of years sitting on my front patio. It did just fine, and I had figs, and every winter I would move it into the garage. One winter, I don't remember what happened. There was a lot going on in our life, and the fig stayed outside and did not survive the winter. So you can grow a Chicago hardy fig in a container if you remember to move it inside out of the winter elements. Anything else?
Yes, I have a pot that the bottom broke off. I have planted it at an angle, but how do I stop the runoff of soil?
How do you prevent the loss of soil?
Yes.
Put a coffee filter over the hole. Was that the problem?
It sounds like the bottom broke off and they planted it at an angle, and I don't know if they can put a coffee filter in or not.
Oh, I see. You know, actually for that one, I would repot the entire plant.
Someone killed their desert rose by overwatering. And a comment, I use trivets under my pots on the deck. Can you use parchment paper if you do not own coffee filters?
No. Parchment paper is not going to let the water drain through quickly enough, if at all.
That are all the questions so far.
Okay. I would like to address Naomi's use of trivets. That does raise the pot off of the deck, but I don't know that it takes care of the water draining onto the deck. But I'll explore that with Naomi later, because if whatever she's doing, if that works, that would be wonderful. Okay, we are going to move on to part 2, which is what I call containers on steroids. And I use that term kind of jokingly. It is not a scientific definition at all. I use it because I'm talking about an oversized container, typically designed for another use, but adapted to gardening, or an oversized container constructed by the gardener. So why? Why would you use a container that was very large? Now, like I said, I have arthritis in my spine, so bending over to garden has become extremely painful. My front yard is covered in tree roots, and so I can't plant anything in the ground between the tree roots because it just won't survive. The containers on steroids provide workable solutions for both of the problems. So what I grow in my oversized container are all those garden vegetables that I don't want to bend over to plant or bend over to harvest. So the only thing I now have growing in my in-ground garden beds are my tomatoes and okra. Everything else has gone into a container. So we had some questions come in on the website for extension in the last week. The main one was, what all can you grow in a container? What all vegetables can you grow in a container? And frankly, I think almost every vegetable can be grown in a container of one type or another. Now, I would not grow asparagus in a container. And I'm not familiar with growing rhubarb, but as I understand it, rhubarb is a perennial that comes back. I would not grow it in a container. Perhaps some of our vegetable gardeners who do plant and grow some of the more perennial type vegetables that survive our winters might want to weigh in on the chat box. But tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, green beans, lettuce, radishes, beets, you name it, you can grow it in a container. Okay, I guess I better move my slide. The first kind of oversized container is a barrel garden. You take the plastic barrel and you cut it in half, and you literally can get 2 containers out of 1 barrel. These are not mine. I just think they've done a very nice job of taking a basic barrel and turning it into something a little prettier than just the white barrel. One of these barrels will contain and hold 1 large tomato. Determinate variety works best. A determinate variety is one that grows to a certain height, then produces its fruit. An indeterminate tomato just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing, and so you would have to provide a mighty stake in these. You can grow 1 large pepper or 3 smaller pepper plants in one of these. You can grow a zucchini. Now, a compact or patio style zucchini does work best. You can grow a broccoli or a cauliflower or cabbage or several kale or kohlrabi or rutabaga. You can plant a lot of beets, carrots, radishes, or other root crops spaced according to the seed packet instructions. And the same goes for lettuce, spinach, and other greens. I actually just broadcast plant the spinach and lettuce seeds, and then I thin and eat until I have the right size plants growing in there. Okay, now these are things I have grown in barrels. Over here on the left, this was from last year's garden. And as you can see, I've got 2 blue barrels and 2 black barrels, and the colors mean absolutely nothing other than those were the barrels that I happened to lay my hands on. And sometimes I have a pretty box that goes around them. This container cover was made from fence pickets, and it just tones down that color. It tones down the heat absorption from the black color. I use tomato cages. They're 5 feet tall. We made them from concrete reinforcing mesh. Tomatoes grow up. By July, they had grown to the top and were dropping over the sides and starting to trail all over. Back here in the black barrels last year, I grew 1 green zucchini and 1 yellow zucchini. And the pots did not really particularly heat up because this is east. And by the time we got the west midday hot sun, they were being somewhat shaded. It also didn't really matter because I have an ongoing battle with squash bugs, and they had wiped these out in no time at all. So I'm going to kind of do like Dennis Patton, the horticulture agent in Johnson County. I absolutely give up growing zucchini. I will go to the farmer's market and buy mine. This was a tomato, and as you can see, I staked it with bamboo. The bamboo is very heavy duty. It's hard to find anymore. Most of the bamboo I'm finding in garden stores and nurseries is much thinner. So I have started using T-posts or metal rods to anchor tomatoes in a container. It's not pretty. Some of us were discussing the other day that some people have beautiful gardens because they spend a lot of time on the aesthetics and the flowers. And some of us have miniature farms in our backyard. My backyard is a farmette. So I'm really not concerned about whether I'm using bamboo or I'm using T-posts. But if you are concerned about the beauty of your vegetable gardening, then scout around. You can find a lot of things that provide a prettier view than a T-post. Okay, a number of years ago, I experimented with burpees on deck corn, and this is not an endorsement or a non-endorsement. I'm just mentioning that there are corn varieties out there specifically designed for growing in a container. And you plant 4 seeds and you get 4 stalks of corn, and you might get 4 ears of corn. It was kind of a fun thing. It also made it very easy for the raccoons to harvest my corn before me, and I had a water garden right across from this, and so they were able to harvest and wash and eat the corn without traveling around my backyard very far. This is another reason why I have opted for large containers. This is an old blackberry bed. And year after year after year, I keep fighting those old blackberries that keep coming up. They did not get the message that I moved the blackberry bed to another part of my backyard. So while I'm battling those, I put a half barrel out there so I can continue growing in this area. So one of the big problems I have found with the barrels is the neighborhood critters. This is not my cat. We have a number of stray and feral cats, but this cat decided that this barrel made a really nice warm place to spend winters. And I don't mind cats, I love cats, but cats like to use this kind of stuff not only for resting, but also as their litter box. So there are spiky covers, ground covers that you can put in the top and keep the critters out. This year, for the first time in 34 years of living in the same place, I am fighting squirrels. They have already dug up a number of my containers, and I'm thinking that those spiky things that you use for the cats might deter the squirrels. Although I came across a video the other day, they're pretty smart creatures and they can very quickly figure out a way around it. One thing I'm hoping is that the things I have planted in the containers will grow up enough and fill in the area that the squirrels will go look for something easier to dig in. Okay, I didn't know where else to put this slide, so here it is. Our horticulture agent, Lynn Lowry, grows a large variety of vegetables in pots. She has a whole collection of these beautiful pots, and I've selected this one here for the potatoes because there's a little special planting considerations. When you plant in an oversized container, or any container for that matter, you want to follow the same planting procedure that you would if you were planting it in the ground. So planting potatoes, she has put her seed pieces, a little soil on the bottom, she's put her seed pieces in, she's added the potting mix on top, the potato grows up, she adds more potting mix, the potato grows up, she adds more potting mix, just like you would if you were growing in the ground. As the potato top grows, you add more soil or straw or whatever to cover and protect the developing tubers. Then the potato flowers and the leaves wilt, and you dump the pot over and you harvest your potatoes. Smart idea, dumping that soil over on a tarp, or you can dump it if you have this sitting out someplace where the potting mix can be just dumped straight into a garden bed, then you don't have to worry about it. Now, I have grown white potatoes and sweet potatoes in the half a 55-gallon barrel. We did not get as large a harvest as I would have liked. I have come up with something different that we'll get to in a moment for growing sweet potatoes, so you don't have to get down on your hands and knees. Okay, so the pros and cons of a cross-cut barrel. Obviously, you're going to have less back strain. It's deep enough for all vegetables. It's amenable to trellises or post, something that you can tie your plant up to. It's also easy to cover. I didn't have any pictures of that, but you can put a hoop over one of those and cover them with summer weight fabric to keep out insects. It's a great size for mixed plantings. You can put a smaller tomato staked to a post on one edge of it, and then you can plant flowers in the front, or you can plant smaller vegetables in the front. Those barrels are just big enough that you can do more than one plant. On the other hand, once you get them filled with potting mix, they do become heavy and difficult to move. They take a lot of growing medium. I buy my potting mix in 54 quart bags. Takes 2 of those. And you're going to get a limited harvest for many plants, particularly your potatoes and sweet potatoes. Now, if the pot, any pot, is too heavy to move, the little tricks are you get yourself a 2-wheeled hand cart or a furniture dolly. You set the pot on a furniture dolly and it's got wheels and it just moves around like a plant caddy. A 2-wheeled hand cart, it helps to have a helper. My husband and I can move our filled crosscut barrels using a 2-wheeled hand cart. One of us does the moving of the cart, the other one walks alongside to make sure that the barrel does not fall off. As you drive around various places, you may be seeing a lot more gardens in stock tanks. I have been gardening in stock tanks now for about 10 years. And I know when I first bought them and said I was going to garden in stock tanks, I had a few raised eyebrows and people thinking I was somewhat crazy. But as you can see, if you look at the internet and you drive around a city, you'll start seeing a lot of places that are using the stock tanks. These are not my pictures. This one and this one came from the internet. This one with the pretty bright yellow stock tank is actually at the Heartland Harvest Garden at Powell Gardens. I think the first thing I grew in a stock tank was a water garden. I had wanted a water garden ever since I started being a master gardener, but there's just really no good place to put one in my backyard. So that was the first garden I had, was in a stock tank. By 2013, I realized that my crosscut barrels, I didn't have enough of them. They weren't working on my deck. And so I decided that a whole line of stock tanks on my deck would make a great kitchen garden. So went out to the feed store and I bought 4 2-foot by 2-foot by 4-foot long stock tanks. And to overcome the problem of rotting out the deck, stock tanks have a drain hole in them, and we used PVC pipe and fittings to create a drainage system that then ran off the end of the deck with a PVC pipe downspout. And we never had a leakage problem from these. Okay, so before I knew that there was a raging debate about using junk in the bottom of a very deep container, I filled the bottom foot of these with plastic, you can see pop bottles, icing buckets from grocery stores. Then we strung landscape fabric, woven landscape fabric, to prevent the soil from running out. And here we trimmed it back because you do not want anything sticking out the top causing a wicking problem for moisture. Working in a tank is a whole lot easier than working in the barrel. It is taller. You have more length about the same width. We did end up finally moving all of our tanks down to the ground when we completely replaced our deck. Slid down the steps very nicely. One of us stood at the top and guided it, and the other one kind of made sure it didn't go too quickly, and we got them all moved out into the lawn. They have traveled around the backyard a number of times with a two-wheeled hand dolly slipped under one side and somebody on the other side to hold it. They are fairly movable. So this year I've got 5 of them lined up on one edge of the in-ground garden, and it is my herb garden. Most of them will be perennial herbs, although every other one does have annual herbs. Root crops grow very nicely in the stock tanks. I had beets last year and I had carrots last year. And as you can see, I had weeds. Weeds don't avoid containers at all, so you will have to remove them, but it is easier to take a weed out of the potting mix in a stock tank than it is out of the ground. And don't mind the construction mess over here. I continually have some kind of new garden project going on. Okay, the metal conducts heat more easily. And the other day I had a friend over, and the first thing she did was reach out and touch the pot or touch the tank here at the top, and it was very warm. But I have this junk in the bottom, and so the bottom was actually cooler because it's lower to the ground. Heat rises, cold falls, and I have never had a problem with these tanks overheating with the root crops. Finally, leave the plug in the stock tank. It makes a beautiful water garden. At one point, I had ours on the deck until we had to replace the deck, and then I found a more permanent home for it in the backyard. Interesting thing, even with an above ground water garden like this, frogs show up. I have a very nice collection of frogs in my backyard, which are wonderful at eating insects. Plus the, shall we say, music they make every night is an added benefit. Okay, pros and cons of stock tank gardens. You have less back strain, deep enough for all vegetables. You can use trellises, you can use hoops and covers. They're great for water gardens. They're great on patios and decks to prevent staining and rotting if you utilize some kind of tubing out the back of the drain of the tank. They do get bulky and heavy to move. They can be moved if you use a two-wheel hand cart and a helper. They take a lot of growing medium. The 5th one I put in the other day, I did not put anything in the bottom of it because I have discovered that anything you put in the bottom, like plastic, gets crushed under the weight of the potting mix. And so every year I was having to add more potting mix. So I just skipped the filler this year, and it took 2.5 bags at 54 quarts a bag to fill it. This was actually my last raised container gardening. You take a barrel and you cut it lengthwise from top to bottom. This is pictures from the internet. This was ours. I set it up along the fence. You can see the construction. We constructed the entire thing in the driveway in the component parts and then moved them into the garden and set them up, screwed all the pieces together. The black landscape fabric here is simply because I hate weeding, so I covered the ground underneath it, and it cuts down on the weeds. This gives you a little better view of the construction. We use 2x6 posts for the legs, 2x4s. There's a center brace that runs underneath, and definitely I took a paddle bit and I drilled drainage holes along the center of the bottom and on either side of the you can't see it, but just behind the 2x4 here. I used a soaker hose the first year that puts way too much water on too fast, and most of it drains out the bottom, pools here, leaving the sides high and dry. So I think drip irrigation or hand watering would work much better. Where I have almost 40 feet of barrels here, I would opt for drip irrigation. Okay, the first year I grew green beans for the most part down here. They did beautifully. I had hot peppers here. These 3 beds, I have to tear apart and see what's going on because the peppers didn't do well. And this year, this was 2 years ago, this year I have green beans in all of them. Down here, the green beans are doing well, and these 3 are not. So it's still an experiment in progress. As you can see, this is Mr. Bob. As many of you know, he has a lot of health issues, and he recently discovered he has 3 herniated discs in his back. So working at something like this is much easier. We have no bending over, not to work the soil or the potting mix, and not to harvest, not to tend to the bugs. Last year I grew squashes and melons in them, and it was so easy to stand there and take a leaf, flip it over, look for the squash bug eggs, squish them off. But the squash bugs got ahead of me, and so again, I'm not growing zucchini and squash anymore. This year I have beans. Like I said, I have beans planted all along there. Okay, so the pros and cons of a lengthwise cut barrel garden. Almost no back strain. Definitely ideal for people who garden from a wheelchair or perhaps need to take a walker out so they can periodically sit down. It's practical for shorter vegetables and flowers. I would not grow a tall vegetable in here because you'd never be able to reach the top, and I don't think they're deep enough for the root system. On the other hand, you need some carpentry skills to build them. Constructing them is somewhat labor intensive, but tending to them is only medium labor intensive. Obviously, they cannot be moved. So is this a container or not? Well, it's a mix. It's mixed, part raised bed and part container. Again, it takes a lot of growing medium, and it's somewhat difficult to water so that you get your soil evenly moist. Okay, this is my last container on steroids, and I don't know, is this a container or is it a raised bed? I call it a container because it sits above the ground, and I handle it the same way I would handle any container. Because it sits on the pretty side of my backyard, surrounded by flower gardens, I wanted it to look better than a bare barrel, and so we use cedar both for the looks and for the longevity. And that's not my cat. That's another one of the neighborhood feral stray cats. But she likes to spend the winter sunning herself over here where the soil is still nice and warm. There are no plans for this. I drew them myself, and I had to get my engineer son to help me with some of the calculations as we worked down the slope. My original idea was to use this as a strawberry bed, but I found much better uses for it. The strawberry that I can rotate green beans between here and the other ones. I can use root crops between here and barrels. So it really helps with rotating crops. Takes a lot of growing medium, literally a ton. I counted, and I had bought some topsoil to put in the deeper end and then potting mix to go on the top. And I counted the bags, and I moved a ton of soil and dumped it in there. So after getting this all going, I thought, hey, this would be a great place to build a greenhouse so I can keep gardening in here in the winter. What I did not take into consideration was the height from the ground to the top on that low edge. Because here, this is 18 inches tall. Back here, it's 36 inches tall. When I work back here, it's like working at the kitchen counter. Mr. Bob was unable to get on a ladder at this point in his life, and I was afraid to get on a ladder, and so we kind of botched building the roof on the greenhouse. And then this came, and that happened. So for now, that's the end of my greenhouse dreams. Mother Nature won that one. We were gone almost all summer in 2019. We had a wedding back east to attend, and then we did some traveling. So I didn't have much of a garden in 2019, but I said, hey, I can grow sweet potatoes and white potatoes in my keyhole garden. And I planted 36 sweet potato slips in here, and Mother Nature took care of them while we were gone. A neighbor made sure that they got some water. So you can see I've got soaker hoses in there, and those do work quite nicely. I can construct a mini hoop over these because these lovely critters have invaded my yard, and they like green beans as much as they like roses. So I got wire hoops and summer weight insect barrier cloth, covered my green beans up, and I won the war with the Japanese beetles, and I had an amazing crop of green beans last year. So there's a lot of versatility for what you can do with containers or even raised bed containers. Keyhole gardens, a lot less back strain, ideal for people who garden from a wheelchair or need a walker. They are practical for shorter vegetables and flowers. They're also excellent for root crops. Very labor intensive to construct though and to fill. And obviously you're not going to move this once you fill it. And it takes a lot of growing medium. Okay, any questions on containers on steroids?
Yes, we have lots. I cannot keep a rosemary in a pot alive. Please help.
Okay, rosemary, for starters, rosemary is primarily Mediterranean or Southern California, seems to be where it does the absolute best. Does not like rich soil, so a potting mix is a little richer than it wants. If you're going to try to keep it alive over the winter, everything I've read says it's difficult to bring a rosemary plant inside and keep it alive. I tend to believe that because I can't keep them alive. I suspect we have some other vegetable gardeners, though, who may have had success. If so, please put your information in the chat box and let's help Jessica out.
Have you grown spaghetti squash in a container? What size would you recommend?
I have not grown spaghetti squash. You can grow that. I would recommend the 55-gallon barrel cut in half, and understand that you need to put it someplace that it's going to, the vines are going to trail out, but you can plant the actual plant in the barrel.
Next question. What recommendations do you have to avoid squash bugs? I have been able to fight them off over the years, but do you have any recommendations to avoid them altogether?
Short answer, no. I know there are a lot of tricks out there. You can spray with something like 7 when the squash bugs are teeny tiny, like after they've just hatched. But you need to make sure that you are actually spraying the insects and not the top of the plants, which requires you to turn the leaves over and look. You can turn the leaves over and squish the eggs before they hatch, but it becomes a very time-consuming process. I don't know that there is any one surefire way of dealing with squash bugs. I know we have a couple of our master gardeners who say, oh, I've never been bothered by them. I am insanely jealous. K-State Research and Extension does have a publication on dealing with squash bugs and squash vine borers. And again, I've got a link at the end of the slide that will talk about that publication or the general publication.
If you have them 1 year, you should not plant squash then for another year or 2.
You know, I tried that. I have not found it workable. I thought moving my squash and zucchini plants up out of the ground might make a difference. It didn't. The squash bugs found them immediately when I put them in containers. They're just a big battle to deal with. If you have the time and the determination to stay on top of squishing eggs and spraying, you might win that battle.
Our next question, where do you get food safe barrel?
Okay, the plastic barrels, you can kind of check around with food supply companies. You want something, if you're growing vegetables, you want something that has not had anything toxic in it. Actually, I just think for safety all the way around, a barrel that has not had petroleum products or poisons or anything. I actually have a man at church who gets the barrels for me. He gets them from one of the major food industries in the Kansas City bottoms. If you're not in Kansas City, you might check with your conservation district. I know our conservation district gets the barrels for making rain barrels. So you can check with them, or you can check with your extension office and find out a source for barrels in your area.
Okay, the next question's relating to rhubarb. I planted 3 rhubarb plants in a large 22-inch container or containers for the first time after researching. One survived and is thriving, the other 2 never surfaced.
Okay, that's good to know. Sometimes, sometimes I experiment. So I think the lady who did this with the rhubarb plants, good for her. It's a nice experiment. And sometimes you just have to see what's going to happen.
Next question. Have you found anything that keeps chipmunks from caching their seeds in your pots?
Oh, you know what? I don't think I finished answering that question on the barrels.
Yes.
They wanted to know what you use to cut them. A saber saw, or what's the other one? A reciprocating saw. My husband calls it a sawzall. I think that's a brand name. But you do want some kind of heavy duty saw that will cut them in half.
And then have you found anything that keeps chipmunks from caching their seeds in your pots? Chipmunks or squirrels?
Okay, what was that?
Have you found anything that keeps chipmunks from caching their seeds in your pots? Barry?
Not yet. Not yet. Still working on it.
Comment, my cousin grows potatoes in 5-gallon buckets, similar technique as your friend.
Yes, 5-gallon buckets are an excellent container for growing vegetables. I have a friend that's all he gardens in is 5-gallon buckets. Just remember, drill holes in the bottom for the water to drain out. And I saw on the internet the other day, there are some really nice plans for making a wood frame for holding those 5-gallon buckets so that they're off the ground. And they add an aesthetic, a pretty look to using 5-gallon buckets.
Someone made a comment, I've seen Walmart selling half-cut barrels. Is there a minimum size for water garden container?
No. I have a pot that is about 15 inches in diameter and maybe 6 inches deep. I put a water hyacinth in it, and of course water hyacinths very quickly procreate, so you'll have to periodically pull them out or create another small water garden. It's a nice way to start a water garden, is you can start small and see what you like.
And barrel gardens lengthwise cut, how cool is that?
I happen to think it's really cool, and I have included at the end of the presentation a link to some plans. There's a lot of plans out there, but I've provided the link for the one I use.
We had another comment about rosemary is very water sensitive. It is difficult not to over or underwater rosemary in a pot in the winter. It also gets powdery mildew easily. I have seldom gotten rosemary to overwinter either outdoors or indoors.
Yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit ago.
Yeah, how do you control mosquitoes in your water garden?
Yeah, I see another question about controlling mosquitoes in the water garden. There is a product, I call them mosquito dunks. Most nurseries sell them now. They're a little round donut shaped thing. They contain a organic chemical that kills the larva so that the mosquitoes don't hatch. I throw one of those dunks into every water garden I have. I've got the big one out back, but I also have another one out front. Also, mosquitoes don't like moving water, so if you want to put a pump and a fountain feature in there, They also sell, the same company that makes the mosquito dunk sells a granular product now, which is really nice if you have places around your yard that tend to have standing water for any length of time. You can throw a few of those granules in them. I do not, knock on wood, I do not have much mosquito problem.
That's all our questions.
Okay, design basics. The color wheel is one of the first things you should consider. And a lot of this goes for flowers, but we will get some mixed vegetables in here too. So when planning colors, you can go the triangle or the secondary color triangle, or you can match up things that are directly across from each other. And that gives you an extremely pleasing color concept in designing your container. As we discussed before, plants in containers should not be more than 2 times the height of the pot, nor more than 1.5 times the width. And 2/3 of your container of flowers should be, or should a mixed container, should be foliage. Adds color, it adds texture. The things you're looking for, you want flowers, but you also want different textures. Just the whole mix adds something very pleasing to the eye. So having just said that about mixed foliage, let's break that rule right off the bat. Sometimes a single plant with a lot of flowers makes a very beautiful container. So this sunflower here was freshly transplanted when I took this picture. And within a very short time, it had more flowers and was a very good conversation piece with my neighbors who were viewing it from the proper 6-foot social distancing of last year. Here we have a variety of colors of dahlias. We've got pretty much all the same texture. We have different colors, and still it's extremely pleasing to the eye. Here we have a container of coleus, all one variety, but different colors. And the chartreuse color here picks up and makes the green in this bicolor really pop. So your thrillers are your plants that grow tall. They're the ones that catch the eye first, the vertical plants. You can get a spiked dracaena, purple millet, any kind of grass that isn't going to fill up the entire pot. Your spillers are your trailing plants. They can be wave petunias, sweet potato vine, licorice vine. You can use a vinca vine. Word of caution on vinca vines. They are thugs. They will spill over. They're okay in the container, but they will spill over and take root in any nearby lawn that you may have. I had them take over my front yard, which was fine because we do not have but a little bit of grass in our front yard because we have the 2 big trees with all the roots. So the vinca vine has pretty much covered my front yard, and that came from 6 little vines that I bought for containers. So use the vinca vine with care. Your fillers are the ones that are going to provide you with your flowers. Use different textures. You may use a daisy shape. You may use a mum shape. Don't go crazy though and put a lot of everything in the pot. You want it to mesh together in color, or the color wheel using the opposing colors on the color wheel. The thing you definitely want to do is select plants with the same growing requirements, the same amount of water, the same amount of sun exposure. You're not going to put a shade-loving begonia in with a sun-loving petunia. That's just not going to work. One or the other will die. So when I finally got over doing just a vegetable garden and decided to branch out into flowers, I stuck to this formula: thriller, spiller, and filler. This was one of my first attempts, and this was after it was fairly freshly planted. Of course, by the end of summer, the sweet potato vine was all over. I learned the hard way: 3 sweet potato vines in a 24-inch container was a little much, but you live and you learn. So you can take the same concept of thriller, filler, and spiller, and apply it to other kinds of plants. It doesn't just have to be this tried and true formula. Here you can use succulents, and I'm working on one right now with succulents and cactus. It's too small to take a picture of and have anything be impressive. So this did come from a magazine. But there's no set rule on what you use in your containers. If you find a plant you like and it is amenable to a container and you get the right size container, go for it. The growing season is short. Have fun. Be creative. Even if you think you're not creative, you probably have way more creativity in you than you realize because you're a gardener. Okay, this is Design Basics Plus. This is mixed containers, vegetables and herbs and flowers. Nothing says that you have to grow all flowers in a container or all vegetables in a container. Here we've got a little tumbling tomato, and we've got some herbs, and we've got some nasturtium. And the person who assembled this one decided they wanted these nice, mellow, pale green colors, and that works very well. I would probably, if I were doing something like this, I tend towards brighter colors. I would use a bright red tomato and some bright nasturtium or calabricoa, something. But again, pick your colors you like, and you can do this beautiful themed hanging basket. These on the right continue to amaze me because somebody really put some thought into this, picking up the reds and the yellows and the blues from this patio carpet and translating that into a mixed container of tomatoes and peppers and flowers. And my guess is this is a large container because I know when you grow a tomato and flowers in a container, that tomato tends to overhang the items in front of it. So again, they've used a trellis, tie those tomatoes up, tie those peppers up, and it makes for a beautiful setting. Now, if you are strictly vegetables, you can make a beautiful mixed vegetable container that would be worthy of setting out for the world to see. Here they have used cool spring crops in colors that are very complementary. We have lettuce, a strawberry. I'm kind of intrigued by the one strawberry. Beets, I believe that's either kale or a small cabbage, and flowers. And it's just, they've done it in a big box, and it's just absolutely beautiful. Here is more of a middle of the summer planting with tomatoes and herbs and a pepper. And I just find it all very delightful. The National Garden Bureau, which the URL is down here at the bottom, they have quite a variety of plans or pictures showing a lot of different containers. These were the three that they highlighted for mix of vegetables and flowers. And these are tabletop planters. So you can set them on your patio table as long as they get the right amount of sunshine. And I just think it was so neat to sit down at a table for dinner and have these as a centerpiece. Okay, so why would you grow your vegetables all in a mixed container? Well, 30 years ago, a number of homeowner associations were prohibiting certain kinds of gardens. I still occasionally hear that some homeowner associations are prohibiting any kind of vegetable gardens. So rebel gardeners have been working for several decades trying to figure out how to incorporate food with flowers. I had a friend in Maryland whose homeowner association said they could not have vegetable gardens. So being the rebel she was, she planted this big circle of sunflowers that took up most of the perimeter of her front yard. And she filled in the center with tomatoes and peppers, and the sunflowers provided such a thick screening that the homeowner association never caught on that she was growing vegetables. I thought that was rather daring. Finally, do not be shy about recreating something you find in a magazine. This one on the left was a Sunset Magazine Beach in a Pot. And something about it I just loved. So I said, you know, I am going to imitate this. Now, some of these plants, I could not find this flower here. This grass does not do well. So I recreated it. It's early in the planting season. It actually did grow up and look very nice by the end of the year. So they say imitation is the sincerest flattery. If you're out in the shopping around and you see something in a nursery that you like, but you don't really want to spend the $60, $70, $80 on their container that they have put together, snap a picture of it, recreate it yourself. There are hundreds of container arrangements on the internet. I tend to go with Sunset Magazine, Garden Gate Magazine, and Better Homes and Gardens. It's a personal preference. There are lots more out there. So just put into your search engine, container garden combinations, and you will find so many ideas. So go out there, arrange what looks nice to you. If you don't like it, there's always next year. You can just keep experimenting and working at it. You don't always have to follow thriller, filler, and spiller. It's a guideline because it works. And if you're just starting to put together containers, it's a good place to start. I have a photographer friend who often says, you have to learn the rules and then you can break them, but you don't really break them, you bend them. Same thing with containers. Once you know the rules, you can fiddle around and figure out where you might want to make a minor tweak here or a small adjustment there. Okay, the other thing is everything that is shown on these last two slides, I have now put into the chat box. So you can either take a screenshot or you can just copy the information from the chat box. Last resources screen is simply where you can find me. Again, I repeated my email address. I'm also on Facebook. I hang out on Kansas Gardeners on Facebook, and I'm one of the editors of the Wyandotte County Master Gardeners page on Facebook. There were a couple questions here on design. What are vegetables that shouldn't be planted next to other vegetables? I don't know. I've really never, I know they talk about companion plantings, but if you're talking about planting in containers, you're not going to want to try to pack a lot of different kinds of root vegetables in the same container. I would devote one container to carrots, one container to beets, one large container to potatoes. Frankly, I know in terms of attracting insects, your insects are going to find your vegetables no matter where you plant them. I know that's kind of a rough answer.
I want to thank you for such an excellent presentation.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I appreciate, I hope next time I teach a class, I can have a live audience, that I can actually see your faces and gauge some feedback. That's probably the hardest part for me in making this presentation, is being unable to see all of you. But thank you for being here, and I enjoyed our time.